right, good morning, everybody. Keith Engel for TGI Sports Talk. Sorry about that little blip in the music there. My fingers are a little fat this morning. Want to welcome you all here this morning. It's a beautiful Friday morning here in upstate New York. TGI Sports Talk, still the only live streaming sports webcast in East Greenbush, New York. Mark will love to hear that. Hope he's not got the moving trucks ready to move in and take my territory over. Usually at this point, I'd thank my guests from last week, but we had a little problem, as you know, and I apologize again. And so does Billy Martin Jr. We had a little miscommunication. So you got to see me talk about Billy Martin for an hour last week. Hopefully that wasn't too boring for you guys. My knowledge of that era is pretty solid, but I really wanted Billy Jr.'s perspective, obviously. And we are going to reschedule that. I know a lot of you were excited to talk to Billy, or hear Billy's thoughts anyway. So we'll do that. And today, let's get to today's guest. Today's guest is Fred Mitchell. Fred was a columnist, sports reporter for the Chicago Tribune for, I guess, 41 years or so. Fred can clarify that. I believe he's the only Tribune reporter to ever cover the Bears, the Bulls, and the Cubs simultaneously. I don't know if that's still a fact. He can probably talk about that. He also has a very prestigious college football kicking award named for him, which we'll talk about. And he's also the author of 11-ish sports books about Gale Sayers, which we'll talk about a little bit today, Richard Dent, Billy Williams, Earl Woods, Ryan Sandberg, many books about the Cubs. I'm sure a bunch of things that I'm leaving out here, but Fred can kind of fill in the blanks a little bit. So let's bring in Fred this morning and say hello. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
I appreciate you coming, and you've had a very prestigious career, so I congratulate you on that. Long, and obviously in a major city like Chicago, covering those teams had to be an exciting time for you.
Absolutely. I'm very, very blessed to have had the opportunity to work at one newspaper for so long. It was 41 and a half years, as you mentioned, and got to meet a lot of wonderful people, both people that I covered, as well as colleagues of mine, and people in the newspaper industry at a time and during an era when newspapers were most vital, I would say.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame where newspapers are going today. I've had a few of your colleagues on, some that I think you would know, Kevin Kernan, Ian O'Connor.
Yep.
And we've had these conversations about, where newspapers have gone, and,
Yep.
Growing up reading the New York Sportswriters, and it was exciting, especially when I was a kid, to get the Sunday papers. My dad would go out and get the papers, and I was all excited because that was the best day for the sports sections, right? So, and it's different now. I'm caught up like everybody else reading the sports news and all the news online, and it's just not the same as having a newspaper in front of you. So,
right, yeah, it definitely has changed, and during that 41 year and a half period, I certainly had to adapt to technology and the new ways of presenting the news, the different platforms. It's amazing how it's changed, and yet it remains the same in terms of the necessity to have people who can report accurately, quickly, and with well-resourced information. That's never going to change. It's just the platform that the consumer receives the information, but you still want factual information, entertaining at times, insightful, and complete. So that will never change.
you think the paper form will stick around, or will it be gone eventually altogether?
Boy, I certainly hope it will stick around and continue to serve definite purposes. When I think of newspapers, I was an athlete, and I know what it meant to me and my family to see my name or picture in a newspaper, and the permanency of that, and put it in a scrapbook or wherever you might want to do that. And it's a little different, I think, to see a name or picture online, and it kind of disappears, if you will.
Yeah.
So I think we are reminded of the significance and importance of newspapers when a major event happens, whether it's a death of a prominent person or uh, during the elections now, for instance. I think people will want to preserve those headlines, and certainly the circulation goes up during periods like that, whether we're talking sports, Super Bowls, any uh, very important time in history. We all want to preserve those. So, if for no other reason, I would like to see newspapers hang around for that.
Yeah, I would have to agree. You were a bit of a groundbreaker, I would say a big groundbreaker at the Tribune too, right? You were the first black columnist to join the paper, right?
That's correct. Yeah, first African American on the Chicago Tribune sports staff. That happened in 1974. I was hired by the late Cooper Rollo, and back then it was very common to start out on the copy desk. And on the copy desk, for those who don't know, it's a very important role. Those are the people who would write the headlines for the stories, edit the copy, check for grammatical errors, factual errors, and basically, the last persons to look at a copy before it goes to press. So that was a great introduction to my education professionally in the newspaper business, to have that experience for a couple of years. Then I was given an opportunity to cover high school sports, which in the Chicago area is a really big deal.
Yeah.
We had just two or three of us at the time, but we were covering all of metropolitan Chicago. And so I had a chance to cover people like Isaiah Thomas, uh, Doc Rivers, Terry Cummings, a lot of future professional athletes, Mark Aguirre. Uh, this was a tremendous experience for me as well. And then, as you mentioned, I covered the Bulls, the Cubs, and the Bears. Not at the same time; that would have been impossible.
Right.
But, I'm the only one in the history of the Tribune to have covered those three sports and teams during my career as the main beat reporter, as we refer to it. So proud of that. Proud of the opportunity that was provided to me, and I can look back and remember so many wonderful people that I met along the way, and ability to travel all over the world, literally covering events from the Olympics to professional sports games, exhibition games in Europe with the Bears, for instance, all over the world. So I'm very, very blessed in that.
It just pops in my head when we first got when cables first started to boom. When I was in my 20s, I guess, and we had WGN.
Yep.
And there was the first show of its kind that I can remember was, I think it was, I don't remember what the name of the show was. You can probably help me with my recollection. It was a bunch of Chicago sports writers, Rick Tellender from Sports Illustrated, and what's the name of that show?
Sportswriters on TV. Yeah.
Right. Did you ever appear on that?
I believe I was on once or twice. I was actually, that was an offshoot of the radio version.
Okay.
There was on WGN radio, and I was on that very frequently. Ben Bentley was the host, both on the WGN radio and then televised version of it. We would be on right after a Cubs game on WGN radio, and so you always had listeners driving home from the ball game, calling in or listening to what we had to say. Yeah, it was a very popular show. Bill Joust, Ben Bentley, Bill Gleason, Rick Tellender, all of
Very,
you.
very colorful collection of guys for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Well, speaking of groundbreaking, I mean, it wasn't just in the, and before we jump into, a little bit about the NFL today and the Bears and some historical stuff and some present day stuff. I mean, you haven't broke ground just in your professional career in college. You were a kicker, and you mentioned that you were an athlete, and you played, I believe, at Wittenberg University.
That's
You were a
correct.
kicker,
Right.
a very prolific kicker, setting records for points scored by a kicker in your time there.
Yeah.
And you now have an award named for you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, in 2009, the National Football Foundation realized that.
I've lost your volume a little bit, Fred.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, yeah. In 2009, the National Football Foundation realized that they had an award, a college kicking award for major colleges, the Lou Groza Award. So those are FBS schools, which is about 120 of those colleges. That left over 750 other colleges without recognition for that award. So we're talking about FCS, Division II, Division III, NAIA, community colleges, over 750 colleges. So they decided that they wanted to name that award after me, which is a tremendous honor that I'll be forever grateful. And we have a 35-man selection committee that includes many pro football and college football Hall of Famers.
A lot of prestigious names on that list.
A lot
I saw
of prestigious names on there, from Paul Hornung to Marv Levy and Nick Lowry and Kevin Butler, on and on and on.
Yeah.
So each year, a winner is named, and part of the criteria for the award is community service as well as kicking performance. So I have a lot of people to thank for that. Chris Carney is the president of the Chicago chapter of the National Football Foundation, and he's the one who put the award together. So very honored to have that. I was, I guess, a pioneer as a place kicker back in the 60s in college as a kicking specialist, and I was fortunate to set the NCAA college division kick scoring record for a career way back in the day. This is kind of the payoff for me to have my name associated with this award.
Well, it's a great legacy to have. So congratulations on that. And you mentioned to me when we chatted the other day, and I didn't realize this, that there's at least here in New York, well, New Jersey, I guess, is better, a better location to give the Jets. There is a local tie-in with the award. And I'll let you tell that story, I guess, too.
Yeah. So one of the first winners of the award, I think it was 2013, was Sergio Castillo from West Texas A&M, and we were proud to name him. He had a wonderful career in college, and we flew him and his family, as we do all the winners, up to Chicago, spend the weekend, have a major award ceremony at Hallis Hall, which is where the Chicago Bears train. We take them out to dinner and really give a lot of recognition to small college kickers who otherwise would be sort of ignored. Long story short, Sergio had tryouts with the Atlanta Falcons, and I think it was the New Orleans Saints. Didn't miss a kick, was perfect in the preseason games, but that's the toughest position to win because there's only one kicker on the team. So they most generally keep the incumbent veteran. So that's what happened there. He goes to Canada and has a lights out career in Canada, kicking for 3 or 4 teams in the Canadian Football League. I believe his last year in Canada, he made 41 out of 45 field goals.
Wow.
Including a 56-yarder.
Those are narrow goalposts, I think, too, aren't they? If I remember right. Oh, Fred froze a little. Hopefully he pops back in here. So thank you. Till Fred gets back in, he froze up a little bit. I want to let everybody know that my guest is Fred Mitchell, legendary sports writer with the Chicago Tribune for 41 years. We're just talking about the Fred Mitchell Kicking Award, and Sergio Castillo was kicker for the Jets, who has just been signed recently to the last two games when there was an injury. And hopefully Fred is reconnecting as we speak. And I'll welcome you guys in, David and Regina. There's Fred.
Okay, I'm back. All right.
All right. I was just filling in for you. So
finish the story off. The New York Jets signed Sergio Castillo to their practice squad a couple of weeks ago when their regular kicker, Sam Ficken, suffered an injury. I believe it was a groin injury. And Sergio has stepped in the past two games and done tremendously. His first game, I think, was against Buffalo. He made his only field goal attempt and only extra point attempt. And then last weekend, he kicked 3 field goals. I think it was at Kansas City they played.
Yeah.
He had a 55-yarder and a 48-yarder and a 39-yarder in that game. So in an otherwise bleak season for the Jets, they have a fan in me as far as giving Sergio Castillo a long-awaited opportunity to fulfill his dream in the National Football League and to prove himself. And it just shows that he's determined and capable. And I'm just thrilled to see a young man of high character and high quality perform as well as he did.
Yeah, it's funny. You see these guys, and you often see kickers from small schools or some that didn't go to school at all. And being a Patriot fan myself, I see a guy like Sergio Castillo that I kind of really didn't pick up on until you talked about it. And I did a little research and I saw some of the numbers you saw, and I'm thinking, I'm watching, Nick Folk, who I think graduated the same year I did from high school, if I'm not mistaken. I'm 60 years old. I don't know if he's that old, but he feels like he's that old. Yeah. But the Sergio Castillos slip under our noses. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the thing that we always emphasize about kicking is that regardless of whether it's Division III or community college or Division I, the fields are the same size, the goalposts are the same width. It's just a question of how big the crowd is that's watching you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, kicking, whether it's place kicking or punting, is the same, and that's why small college kickers need to be recognized and evaluated the very same way.
Yeah.
So another quickly, I'll say Cole Tracy is a name that some people might be familiar with at LSU a couple of years ago. He had a wonderful year. He won our award as a senior at a tiny Assumption College out east. And I think he made something like 27 of 29 field goals or something like that at Assumption College. And he had a year of eligibility left as a graduate transfer. So he goes from playing and kicking in front of about 2,000 people every Saturday to 100,000 at home at LSU. And he goes there and has almost the exact same statistics. And he was a finalist for the Lou Groza Award, which he very well could have won. But he's living proof that regardless of what level you're kicking at, your performance is very similar.
Yeah. At the same time, like you said, it's the hardest job to get and keep because there's only one. And they don't carry 4 backups, right? So we're switching gears a little bit. Fred, obviously you've written a lot of books, as I alluded to in the opening. The one that I know of the best was the Gale Sayers book, but you've written about Billy Williams and Earl Woods, who I was surprised to see, Richard Dent, Ryan Sandberg, Tyrone Willingham, lots of 3 other books about the Cubs, possibly. What was your favorite book to write, and what really brought? I got to guess what it is, but what motivated you to write that book?
Well, there are a lot of favorites that I had. Certainly Gail Sayers' book was a tremendous experience for me, and it really sparked a great friendship between me
And
and
I'm
Gail.
sorry for your loss there too, by the way.
Thank you, who recently passed away.
Yeah.
And so I was very blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to spend so much time with him and learn about his life and like I say, develop a great friendship. Another book that stands out in my memory is the book called Playing Through with Earl Woods, and I talked with Tiger a little bit and had him write the forward to the book. But that experience was tremendous because I had a chance to kind of go behind the scenes and watch Earl and Tiger interact. When the cameras were not on, and I could say that the relationship they had was was true. So I spent a lot of time at the home where Tiger grew up in Cypress, California, with Earl, and traveled to several of the golf tournaments, including the Ryder Cup, which was in Spain that year. So that was a wonderful experience as well.
Sure was.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Gail Sayers. I know that you've told me that you became very good friends with Gail. Was it during the writing of the book, or was it previous to that?
It was previous. Excuse me. It was previous to that, but it was certainly enhanced by the time we spent talking about the book. Writing the book together.
Yeah.
Like so many other pro football fans, Gail was somebody I watched perform, and I try to tell younger people who did not see him that he's one of those athletes who you really had to see to appreciate. Uh, it's almost like the film videos don't even do justice to what a great runner he was. Uh, so I admired him from afar at first, like everybody did. And then during the period that I covered the Bears as a beat writer, there would be occasions where Gail would be at various events, and I got to meet him personally and get to know him. And he had a foundation which helped young people, and he was kind enough to invite me to many of those events and watch the great things that the foundation did. And then we kind of picked up on that with the book because the essence of the book uh, was the fact that professional athletes need to prepare for their post playing career. He would always talk about preparing to quit. And we all know that he only played, I think it was 68 games, and yet did such a remarkable job that he's the youngest player to ever be inducted in the National Football League
Right.
Pro Football Hall of Fame at the age of 34. So he had the rest, half his life to go to do something impactful, and indeed he did. A lot of people didn't realize that he grew up very poor in Omaha, and he actually had a bit of a speech impediment, which caused him to be a little bit shy and perhaps aloof, especially to the media. And I think a lot of people took that the wrong way initially. And he worked on his speech and improved and gained confidence in being able to speak to the media or in front of a crowd. So one of the main initiatives of his foundation was to help, especially at-risk youth, gain confidence when it came to public speaking. So all the dinners that he had for his foundation, he would have young, 9, 10, 11-year-olds stand in front of an audience of maybe 1,000 people and introduce the guests for that evening, whether it was, Barry Sanders or Paul Hornung, some of the other players. So this was something that he was very proud of and should be given a lot of credit for.
Yeah, everything. I wish I was. I don't know. I wish I was a lot older. I wish I was older that I could have seen Gale Sayers play in his prime. As you said, he only played 68 games. I think 6 seasons, and not all of those 6 seasons. The Bears weren't very good at that time,
Right.
Unfortunately. With their great history, he came along at a bad time in their history. But the numbers he put up were phenomenal. If people, and I've said it in the promos for this show, that if some of the younger people that see this don't know Gale Sayers, please take a look at Gale Sayers, because he's just a phenomenal athlete. It would have been amazing to see him play in today's game. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I got to believe he would just be all world today in today's game.
Oh, no question about it. He returned kickoffs, returned punts, obviously ran from scrimmage, threw passes occasionally. This is before the age of specialization as far as running back kicks and such.
Yeah.
And he did it all. And as you said, not very good Bears teams at the time, other than him and Dick Butkus. But the rest of the team was not
Right.
not very good, which meant that offensively, most of the time, teams knew that Gale was going to get the ball, and yet he still was able to do what he did. And a subtle rules change that I always point out when we talk to Gale, and Gale and I talked about this a lot, was that during his era, the hash marks were out much, much wider than they are now. Now, if you look at an NFL game, the hash marks are the width of the goalposts.
Yeah.
So there's no short side of the field. Back then, they were out much wider. And so that meant, if somebody goes out of bounds on the right side of the field, they bring the ball to the hash mark. And the defense knew that the wide side of the field is probably where Gale's going to get the ball, so they would shift the number of defenders over to that side, and that was impactful. Even though Gale scored his 6 touchdowns in one game on a very muddy field at Wrigley Field on December 12th, 1965.
It's the 49ers, I think. Is that right?
49ers, yes. And he could have had 7 easily. George Halas took him out of the game after he scored his 6th touchdown, and the Bears got the ball back on the 1-yard line. And even though the fans were chanting to put Gale back in, John Arnett got the short yardage touchdown on there. But anyway, the well manicured fields that we see today would make it much better for a runner like Gale to perform. The only player that he acknowledged, and I would agree, would be similar to him in the modern era, would have been Barry Sanders. So the younger people who remember Barry Sanders and his ability to cut on a dime and make people miss and look really silly on the field.
Yeah.
That was Gale Sayers. Gale was taller and long legs and longer stride, but he had that ability to elude tacklers. And he said that if he was one-on-one with a defender had no chance. And his famous quote was, give me 18 inches of daylight and that's all I need. And that was a factor. He was fast. In high school, he was a sprinter and a hurdler. And he said those skills came in handy on the football field. And George Halas, when he presented Gale for induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, said something to the effect that the likes of his kind we will never see again.
Yeah.
And I sort of believe that.
For those of you just joining us, we're talking with Fred Mitchell, former sports writer for the Chicago Tribune. We're talking a little about his book with Gale Sayers, the great Gale Sayers. One thing I guess, Fred, that people do know, I guess some of the younger generation probably will know of Gale through the relationship with Brian Piccolo, because they did remake Brian's song here just a few years back. Not nearly as good as the original, I would have to say.
Right.
But it's a tremendous story, and it's fairly well told, and we don't have to go into great detail here, but is there anything about the relationship that maybe people don't know?
Well, I would simply say that it was a true relationship. We'll tell your listeners who are not familiar that Gale Sayers and Brian Piccolo were considered the first interracial roommates in professional sports. So on the road and training camp, summer camp, they were roommates. Uh, and Gale said that he didn't feel it was that big a deal at the time because he just said that they played the same position, they had that in common. So why shouldn't they be roommates? Um, and I mentioned earlier about Gale being a little bit shy and aloof because of a speech impediment earlier in his lifetime, and I think it's pointed out in the movie Brian's Song that initially Gale came off as being aloof and standoffish, whereas Brian Piccolo was a very outgoing, ridiculous individual. They each kind of brought out the best.
You lost your volume just a little bit again, Fred. Sorry.
Yeah, I think they both brought out the best in each other because their personalities were a bit different. But other than that, they realized that they had much, much, much more in common than they had differences. So their friendship was highlighted in the movie. And of course, Brian passed away from a rare form of cancer at the age of 26. This hit Gale hard, and I think it really impacted Gale's life thereafter to realize that relationships, friendships, all those things are much more important than anything else in life.
Yeah. It is a tremendous and heartwarming story, and a sad one at the same time. I have to ask you, I mean, did Billy D. Williams do a good job portraying Gale, knowing Gale as well as you did?
Yeah, I think he did, and I know that they had a friendship as well, and yeah, I think Gale was honored to have Billy D. Represent him in the movie.
Yeah, as a younger man, I'm not that young anymore, but I guess relatively speaking, maybe I am. But I was very young when I watched that movie, and it's funny because I really thought Billy D. Williams was running the ball in those highlights when they'd show it. And I thought, man, he's a great athlete. Why is he an actor?
Yeah, he did, and it had to be part of the portrayal. And I often tell people that that movie, if it weren't a true story, it would seem kind of corny.
Yeah.
People wouldn't maybe believe it so well, but it was a true story. And Gale, always said that it was a true depiction of their relationship. So he was he was off. He said he was often amused that people might recognize him in an airport or something like that, and instead of remembering him as a football player, they would think of the movie. Oh, you Brian's Song, Brian's Song. So he thought that was pretty funny.
Well, it's still one of those movies, and it doesn't come on that often anymore, unfortunately. But whenever I come across it, it's impossible for me not to stop and watch. So, it's carried on well, I think, or held up well through the years. So,
yeah, and during these times that we're having today, these days, I think that movie could be even more impactful to see how in terms of racial relationships and the impact that sports can have on improving those situations. I think that movie really stands the mark of time.
Yeah, I guess we could all learn some lessons in that regard for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, let's move forward a little bit. I have to. I'll ask you. So, what were some of your favorite teams to cover through the years? You had some great teams, in your tenure, obviously in Chicago. And what was your favorite team to cover?
Well, as you said, I was able to cover a lot of great teams, a lot of great athletes. But the biggest surprise for me was the 1984 Cubs because, um, excuse me, the year before they had finished in last place, they changed managers during the offseason. Jim Fry came in as a manager. They were not predicted to be a contender. They finished in fifth in 1983. And then during spring training, it's just spring training, but still, they lost 11 straight exhibition games. So the expectations were not very high. But then Dallas Green was general manager at the time, and he pulled off several big trades. And the Cubs got Rick Sutcliffe, Bobby Dernier, Gary Matthews. Later in June, I think it was Dennis Eckersley. Really transformed the team. They go on and win the division in '84, win 96 games, and really just came within a few outs of making it to the World Series.
Painful loss in the playoffs, right?
Painful loss to the Padres. But that was a memorable year for me because it was totally unexpected that they would even contend, not to mention win their division and come that close to going to the World Series. Now, when you talk about other teams that I was involved in helping to cover, obviously Michael Jordan and the reign that they had was captured so well in the recent documentary, The Last Dance. And those were remarkable years to see.
Did you make it into the documentary at all? Were you in there?
I was. Well, yes. Just they put up this story that I wrote when Jerry Krause mentioned that he wanted to bring Michael Jordan back, but Phil Jackson was not coming back, according to Jerry Krause. So yeah, that story was put up during that documentary and talked about. But I got to know Walter Payton, the late great Walter Payton, very well. Obviously Gale Sayers, Michael Jordan. Going back to a player that had retired many years earlier, but Ernie Banks, I had a really great relationship with Ernie. So these are, relationships that you don't take for granted. And, sometimes it sounds like you're just name dropping.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's you get to know these people on a personal level, realize that they have issues and concerns just like everybody else. They're human beings. And I really, cherish those relationships.
Was there anybody that I won't say you disliked, because that's probably not a fair question, but anybody that was a tough interview for you, or?
Oh, sure. A lot. I covered the Bears when Mike Ditka was coaching, and it was kind of a double-edged sword because as a reporter, you want to be able to have a quotable source that you're writing about, and to that extent, Mike Ditka never failed. On a slow news day, he was going to give you some kind of a controversial comment a lot of comments that would be politically incorrect nowadays for him to get away with.
It'd be hard for him to be in the game today.
Yes, yes. So from that standpoint, he was golden, providing that. But he was difficult not just to me, but to all the reporters. And you would get a question out, and he would fire back with some sort of a personal insult or something that didn't deserve that kind of response. But he would also give you something that was quotable for a story. He was the same way with his players. He would criticize them, use us as a media, criticize whether it was Fridge Perry or you name it, Jim McMahon. He would rip them. Richard Dent, he and Richard Dent did not get along at all, and that's unfortunate. Richard was a Hall of Fame player. Ditka was constantly, according to Richard, Ditka was constantly threatening to trade him away, and there was a lot of animosity there, even to the point where Richard was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I don't think Mike Ditka attended that event for one of his former players. So I would say that Mike Ditka was difficult, almost by design. I think that's kind of the way he wanted it, and didn't make our job easy in terms of that.
Well, he coached one of the best teams in the history of football, the '85 Bears, which is a painful last game of the season for me as a Patriots fan. I will point out we were ahead 3-0 in that game.
That's right.
The next time I looked up, it was 35-3, but that's a different story. So, there's always been a lot of stories through the years. Is Ditka a great coach? Was Buddy Ryan responsible for that as much as Ditka? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean that's a good debate. There was tremendous talent on that team, and the biggest story here is that they didn't win more than one Super Bowl. The fact that Jim McMahon was injured quite a bit really limited what they could do offensively, but defensively they were one of, if not the most dominant defensive team in the history of the NFL. So we're talking about takeaways, we're talking about sacks, we're talking about stuffing the run. So you had all these Hall of Famers on that defensive side of the ball: Dan Hampton, Richard Dent, Mike Singletary, and some of the other guys are borderline Pro Football Hall of Famers. Steve McMichael, I don't think gets enough credit for what he did, for instance.
Well, I guarantee you Tony Eason goes to sleep every night seeing those guys' face still.
Yes. Yeah. So it should have won more, and a lot of people question whether different coaching would have made a difference. There's always blame and fingers to point when things don't go the way they should.
Sure. Well, sticking with the Bears for a second, I mean, obviously, that was one of the greatest teams in history, but they've had very, the up and down success, moderate success through the years. Nothing. I guess they got the one Super Bowl since then, right, against the Colts.
That's right.
What about today's team? I mean, do you think they're heading in the right direction? Is Nagy the right guy? When they drafted Mitchell Trubisky, I really thought it was a good move. Well, maybe not trading up to get him, because they could have got him wherever they would have got him anyway. But does he have any talent? Is he not that good? Is it a coaching problem? How do you see this team today?
Well, the Bears, probably more than any other franchise that I can think of, have had difficulty in answering that question at the quarterback position. When you realize that Sid Luckman, in the 40s, still owns some of the passing records, that tells you enough about,
especially the way the game's played today.
Exactly. Defense is, right now is still their hallmark as a team. Um, and if they could just be average offensively, they could be a threat. And, when you look back at the Super Bowl champion Bears of 86, January of 86, uh, that was kind of their signature as well. Tremendous defense, okay on offense. Jim McMahon was the quarterback. Uh, Obviously, Walter Payton was toward the end of his career, but they were okay offensively and tremendous on defense. So the question is, can they get to the point of just being okay offensively right now? If they can, I think they could be a threat
Can they win with Nick Foles?
again. It's an interesting question because Matt Nagy, called the plays, and it didn't work very well for Mitchell Trubisky. It's not working that great for Nick Foles. So you have to wonder, is it the play calling? And will he be willing to relinquish those duties?
It's hard to do both today, isn't it, in today's game?
I think so. A lot of it is ego on the part of the coaches. And in the case of Matt Nagy, he was a quarterback in the Arena Football League. I think it means a lot to him to be able to feel like he's the best one to call the plays. That's my opinion.
I was a little surprised when they brought Foles in, to be honest with you. I mean, here's a guy, I'll be honest, and again, ruined another Sunday for me, Nick Foles. He's made more money off of very few games in his career. He had a good stretch when Chip Kelly was there and led them to the playoffs, and then he left and went to the Rams and flopped, and he had a good stretch and won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, and he leaves, goes to the Jaguars and doesn't do anything. So he might better make his way back to Philadelphia again so that he can get another big contract somewhere. But
yeah, so often it's a matter of players being in the right system, with the right teammates, right in the case of quarterbacks. It really helps to have a tremendous running game, right? And that's not the case here in Chicago. So I think it's difficult for any quarterback to succeed or excel when you have a subpar or modest running game to sort of balance out the passing game.
yeah,
That's the way defenses are so sophisticated now.
So do you still follow the game, the NFL as a whole, pretty closely, or?
I do, not as close as I did, obviously when I was with the Tribune, but I watch what's going on and see the trends and the way the game's changed. It's still a very entertaining game, and it's interesting to see the transformation of the types of quarterbacks who are successful in the NFL now, who perhaps would not even have been given a chance 10, 15 years ago. The shorter quarterbacks, the Murrays, for instance. These guys.
Russell Wilson is one of the.
Russell Wilson is the best example.
He's second best at work.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder about how many other quarterbacks of that stature who were not given sufficient opportunities to succeed because they didn't fit a certain metric in the NFL scouting standpoint.
What else stands out to you about the game today? I mean, is there any, even just talking about this season, is there any, well, let me start with this. I mean, playing the season in general, I mean, do you think it was a good idea to play the season in the situation that we're in?
Well, certainly unique, isn't it? Not having the fans, and just shows you how much excitement that the fans provide in any of the professional or college sports, for that matter. So I think that really does make a difference. Obviously, in the professional sports, they're able to follow the protocols of COVID-19 a lot better. So I guess I trust the medical people in that regard. So it's just kind of a question of where do we go from here in terms of getting a vaccine and flipping it back to the way it used to be.
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, sports is, as you kind of alluded to, I think it's important to the fabric of this country, right? And it's even with some of the things that surround it today in a political sense. And I try to stay away from those things. I try to separate the two. I have a lot of friends that tell me you can't separate the two. Well, I can.
Yeah.
You know, I believe what I believe here,
Mhm.
and I can watch the games and separate the two. I just can.
Yeah.
And but it's important to be that they're back. I think for the mindset of the country and a distraction where they can be, assuming they can do it safely for the players and their families and whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I teach a course at DePaul University called Sports, Media, and Society. Sports, Media, and Society. And we examine the intersection of sports and what happens off the field, whether we're talking about politics or social injustice, racial equality, all of these factors that undoubtedly impact athletes and coaches and managers and the fans. So it's more of a factor now than ever because of COVID. And and just as you mentioned earlier, so many of my students talk about um, how important it is for them to be able to watch sports and kind of get away from what's going on an everyday basis.
Yeah, well, while everything was shut down, my wife was tired of me watching the 1970 Yankee games on YouTube. So she's like, "Why do these guys? Why don't they look the same as they look when you watch them normally?" That's 45 years ago. That's probably why. But it was fun actually to watch some of those games too. So I watch a lot of 70s football. I don't know. I just had a thing for the 70s, and I was watching all kinds of stuff from the 70s. So I got a little nostalgia while we were out
Yeah.
to get my fix in. To switch gears just a little bit, in Chicago, you guys have got a big story in baseball with this kind of surprising hiring of Tony La Russa. Tony started his career Hall of Fame manager. Obviously, for those of you who may not know, has been out of the game since 2011. He started his career in Chicago. What's your take on that? I mean, was it shocking to you that it happened? Number one, and what do you think is going to come of it?
It was surprising somewhat, but then after I thought about it and realized that Tony La Russa and White Sox owner Jerry Reinsdorf uh, have had a long-term relationship, and one of Jerry's biggest regrets was firing Tony La Russa back in the late '80s or mid '80s, I guess it was, and it's almost like Jerry is saying that he wants to make up for it. He won't say that publicly, but it seems pretty obvious that he's trying to right a wrong. Hawk Harrelson was the general manager of the White Sox at that time. He fired Tony, and Jerry Reinsdorf obviously went along with it at the time. So, as we all know, Tony went on to have a Hall of Fame managing career with Oakland and St. Louis. The biggest question now is whether the game has passed him by. He's known to be old school in terms of how players act and react to. And the White Sox happen to have a really young nucleus of players who are very demonstrative, and Tim Anderson will flip his bat after a long home run, that kind of thing. So La Russa was peppered with those questions a week ago during a press conference about how he would allow that sort of thing. And it was also brought up during a press conference that a few years ago, when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. Tony said something and previously had said something to the effect that he would never put up with that, any player dishonoring the flag, etc.
Yeah.
So he was questioned about that, and now he's said he's learned a lot more and realizes that the kneeling was not about disrespecting the flag or the military or anything like that, but to point out just injustices for minorities with the police.
Yeah.
So, well, that'll be a storyline that will have to be followed as Tony, who's 76 years old.
It'll be interesting how he handles the daily grind.
Yeah, and no question that all eyes will be on him.
Well, he's got a team that's already built to win now. Obviously, they had a good year this year and until the end of the season where they slumped a bit. It's ironic that the manager they just fired is in the running for. I don't know if they named the manager of the year yet, but he was one of the finalists for the
Rick Renteria. Yes.
Yeah. And with Tony, one thing that strikes me, and the comments about the game passing him by strike me as a bit ironic from a person, from dealing with managing people. I guess I get it, but as far as the game itself, I find the comments a bit ironic because the specialization that we see today, especially amongst pitching staffs, and even platooning ball players, Tony La Russa was one of the pioneers of that movement in the game.
Yeah, he's always been very analytical, and he's been involved in the game since winning with St. Louis as sort of an advisor.
Yeah,
watching the game very closely from that standpoint. But yeah, he's always been an X and O's guy as a manager. I remember many interview situations with him previously when he was managing, and he would always want to talk. He said, "Let's talk baseball. Let's talk about the game. Let's not talk about any incidents off the field or disgruntled players or anything like that." So yeah, you're right. He's always been ahead of the game in that regard.
Yeah, and I think he embraced the analytics a bit, as we said, but still had a feel for the game. And I mean, one of the things as a baseball fan, and it's still my first love. It's hard to watch the game sometimes today, but I just feel like the analytics they've just taken. There's no feel for the game, both by the players and by the managers. I mean, they just go by what. Okay, Blake Snell's thrown 77 pitches, and whatever. It's 9:37. He always comes out of the game at 9:37. He's got to come out of the game. That's ridiculous. Kevin Cash has got to. That's got to be one of the most bonehead moves I've seen ever.
Yeah, he's going to have to live with that one. You're right. I mean, at some point, as a manager, you have to use common sense and go with your gut and not just say, "Well, in the past, this is what we've always done."
Right.
That was pretty obvious to everybody watching the game at the time, and hard to explain that one.
Just got to watch what's going on in front of you. It's like you said, common sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Twain said the thing about common sense is that it's so uncommon, right? And it's true in baseball today, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Fred, we're pretty much out of time here. I want to thank you for coming on today with me. Is there any? Do you have any new books?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I have a 12th book out called "The History of Loyola Basketball."
Oh, I saw it.
More Than a Shot and a Prayer, and it's based on obviously a couple of years ago when the Loyola Ramblers made it to the Final Four.
Yeah.
But it's also an historical look at the Loyola basketball program. And the Loyola men's basketball team won the national championship way back in 1963. And that's the only Division I basketball championship of any team in the state of Illinois since 1963. And that year is memorable not only for them winning the championship, but for the fact that the coach George Ireland started 4 African American players on that team, which sounds like no big deal nowadays, right? But back then, there was this so-called unwritten rule where coaches were not putting more than 2 African Americans on the court at the same time. It sounds so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, that particular team endured a lot of racial incidents, and even George Ireland, who was white, got into several post-game arguments with opposing coaches. Players from that team were called names, and fans chanted racist chants on the road against them, threw things at them. Went through all of this, and so we talk about that in the book. We talk about them playing Mississippi State, a team that refused to play integrated teams back then, and how the Mississippi State team snuck out and disobeyed the governor's orders so that they could play an integrated Loyola team. All of these historical things are brought out. So that's the latest book that I wrote, and I even devote a chapter to Sister Jean.
Cool.
101 years old now, and she's the chaplain for the Loyola men's basketball team.
Well, when I was looking at your list of books, I did come across that. I didn't notice if it was available on Kindle. It looks like it is as I see it right now. So I'll have to get myself that downloaded and read it. It's for those of you who are looking for it. It's The History of Loyola Basketball, More Than a Shot in a Prayer by Fred Mitchell. Fred, I thank you for coming on with me today.
Thanks so much.
I had a great time chatting with you. I'm sure we could have talked for a lot longer. Yeah. Maybe we'll have you back on and do it again when you get another book out. Who knows? So
I would love that. I appreciate this so much.
All right. If you want to chat for a second after I wrap up the show, you can hang around. If you got to get going, I understand.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So that's my guest, Fred Mitchell, longtime sports writer for the Chicago Tribune. Again, covered the Bears and the Bulls and the Cubs. Only sports writer to do that. Great interview today. He's got some great books out, guys. Check out Amazon. If you're a reader and you like sports books and books that are about more than just sports, Fred's got some great stuff out there, and I really urge you to check them out. And I will see you guys on Sunday morning. We'll be talking college football wrap up from Saturday. We'll look at the NFL news and do our picks. I thank everybody for tuning in live today. Get out, like, and follow the page at TGI Sports Talk, and I'll see you Sunday morning. You guys have a great day and a great weekend. It's going to be beautiful here in upstate New York.